She told me, "Don't rush, good things take time." But in that moment, I realized, we were already beginning something that felt like it could last forever. The yoga studio was quiet, the air heavy with a calming blend of lavender and incense, as if the space itself invited stillness. The floor was covered in soft mats, neatly aligned in rows, each participant preparing for their practice. As I walked in, I could feel the tension in my body, the tightness in my shoulders from days of work, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts that wouldn't settle. I had come here searching for something, peace, clarity, a moment of quiet, and I hoped that yoga would be the answer. I chose a mat in the back corner, away from the others, not wanting to draw attention. My legs felt stiff from the little physical activity I had done in months, and I knew it would be a struggle to follow along. The instructor walked in, a woman in her early 40s. She exuded a quiet kind of strength, not just in her posture but in her presence. She moved effortlessly, gracefully, like someone completely at home in their own body. Her confidence was immediate, though not imposing. It was the kind of energy that drew you in without saying a word. As she introduced herself, her voice was gentle, but there was an undeniable authority in it. She asked us to sit on our mats, to close our eyes, and focus on our breath. I tried to follow her instructions, but my mind kept wandering, until I felt her gaze. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but then I caught it again, a brief, knowing glance in my direction. It wasn't an overt stare, but a soft, purposeful look that seemed to reach right through me, past my layers of self-doubt and uncertainty. I could feel the air shift, just for a moment, as if something unspoken had passed between us. It was subtle, but it was there, and I couldn't ignore it. The class began with a series of stretches, slow and deliberate. She moved around the room, adjusting students' postures, her touch light yet confident, guiding them into alignment. When she approached me, I tried to concentrate on my breath, to center myself. She knelt beside me, her presence filling the space as she gently placed her hands on my shoulders, guiding me into a deeper stretch. Her fingers brushed against my skin, and for a split second, I felt a warmth spread through me. It was a simple touch, one that would have meant nothing to most, but to me, it felt significant. Her hands were steady, her movements practiced, and in that brief contact, I felt an undeniable pull, something I couldn't quite explain. She didn't linger. She moved on to the next person, but I stayed in the position, my breath shaky, my heart unexpectedly racing. What was it about her that made me feel so unsettled? I'd taken yoga classes before, but never had I felt this drawn to an instructor, never had a simple touch affected me like that. It wasn't just the physicality of it, it was the way she carried herself, the energy she radiated. It was as if she had mastered not only the physical practice but something deeper, something I hadn't yet learned to tap into. As the class continued, I tried to focus on the stretches, on the rhythm of my breath, but my thoughts kept drifting back to her. I found myself stealing glances, each time she moved, each time she spoke. She spoke in a way that made everything feel important, like each movement was a small piece of a much larger picture. But it wasn't just her voice, it was the way she held herself, the way she seemed so comfortable in her own skin, in the present moment. It was something I couldn't put my finger on, something that made her feel both distant and intimate at the same time. When the class ended, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity, like I had been through something transformative, even if I couldn't explain why. I rolled up my mat, still somewhat disoriented, and watched as she moved through the studio, offering quiet words of encouragement to the others. I hesitated, unsure if I should speak to her, but something told me that now wasn't the time. As I stood by the door, preparing to leave, I heard her voice again, this time calling me by name. She smiled as she walked over, her eyes warm, her presence soothing. "How did you find the class?" she asked, genuinely curious. I hesitated, searching for the right words. "It was different." "In a good way," I said, my voice a little shakier than I wanted it to be. She nodded, her smile deepening. "Good things take time," she said softly, as if she were speaking to me as much as to herself. "Don't rush. You're on the right path. Her words lingered with me as I left the studio, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had found something worth pursuing. I wasn't sure where this connection would lead, but I knew that it was the beginning of something significant. I just didn't know how much it would change me yet. After class, the studio was quieter now, the hum of soft music slowly fading into the background. The other students packed up their mats, some chatting in low tones, while others slipped away, each of us retreating into our own space. I lingered, not quite ready to leave, unsure of what had just happened during the class. My mind was still swirling with the sensations of that touch, the warmth of her fingers on my shoulders, the fleeting connection that had felt so profound, though unspoken. As I rolled up my mat, I caught sight of her moving toward the door, preparing to leave. There was no rush in her movements, just a steady calmness, as though she had nowhere to be but exactly where she was. My heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, I took a few steps toward her. "Hey," I called out softly, my voice feeling a little louder than intended in the otherwise quiet space. She paused, turning toward me with that same serene expression she wore throughout the class. "Yes." Her voice was warm, but there was a sense of calm authority in the way she spoke, as though she were always in control of the moment, but never overbearing. "I just wanted to thank you for the class," I said, feeling a bit awkward now that I was standing so close to her. My words felt inadequate, but they were the only ones I could find. She smiled, a soft, knowing smile that seemed to reach all the way into my chest. "You're welcome," she replied, her eyes meeting mine with a kindness that made me feel instantly at ease, but also a little more exposed. "Yoga's not about perfection. It's about presence." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. I had come here to clear my head, to find some peace, but I hadn't expected to feel this, drawn to her. It wasn't just her beauty, it was something deeper, something quieter that seemed to wrap around me with each word she spoke. She shifted slightly, adjusting her bag on her shoulder, and I realized we were standing a bit too close. The space between us felt charged, yet neither of us moved away. There was a strange warmth in the air, a gentle pull that kept us connected, even without words. "I'm still figuring it all out," I said, unable to stop myself from sharing more than I had planned. "It's hard to slow down sometimes, you know." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, it felt like she truly saw me. "It's not about rushing," she said, her voice low and almost tender. "It's about finding the right pace. It comes with time." I could feel the sincerity in her words, and something inside me, a mixture of hope and uncertainty, shifted. I smiled, genuinely this time, feeling like maybe, just maybe, there was more to this than just a yoga class. Maybe this slow, steady pace she spoke of could help me find something I hadn't realized I was looking for. Before I could say anything else, she turned to leave, her movements still fluid and graceful. "I'll see you next week," she said, her words gentle, like a promise. I stood there for a moment, watching her disappear through the door, my heart still racing in a way that wasn't entirely explainable. There was something about her, something I couldn't quite grasp, but I knew that this was only the beginning. The days between yoga classes seemed to stretch on endlessly, filled with the hum of routine and the weight of my thoughts. I couldn't shake the memory of her, the yoga teacher, her smile, her words, the way she had looked at me with such quiet understanding. I had never felt so seen in such a brief encounter. But still, I tried to convince myself that it was just a passing moment, something fleeting, a simple connection that would fade with time. Yet, I found myself counting the days until the next class. When the day finally came, I stepped into the studio again, feeling a mixture of nervous anticipation and excitement that I couldn't quite place. This time, I didn't linger in the back. I chose a spot closer to the front, just a few rows behind her, as if I were drawn to her without knowing why. As I laid my mat down, my eyes instinctively sought her out, and when she appeared, I felt a familiar rush of warmth in my chest. She moved gracefully to the front of the room, her calm presence filling the space like the gentle flow of a river. The class began, and I tried to focus on the poses, on finding my balance, on breathing deeply. But each time I caught sight of her, my thoughts would scatter. She moved with such fluidity, effortlessly guiding everyone through the sequence. She spoke softly, offering gentle corrections to students, and I found myself wishing for her attention, even as I fought to keep my focus. My body was stiff, my movements slower than the others, but I couldn't help but feel a pull, a connection every time our eyes met. Each glance lingered just a moment too long, and each time she smiled at me, it felt like something unspoken passed between us. During a stretch, she came over to adjust my posture. Her hands were light on my shoulders, her fingers brushing against my skin as she gently guided me deeper into the pose. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt of warmth through me. I could feel the calmness of her energy, but beneath that calmness, there was something else, a quiet intensity that matched the way my heart seemed to race whenever she was near. I stayed in the position, trying not to let my emotions show, my breath catching a little as I wondered if she felt it too. As the class went on, the room seemed to shrink, the only thing that mattered was the space between us. I tried to focus on the poses, but my thoughts kept drifting back to her, to the way her presence seemed to ground me, yet made me yearn for more. Each time we locked eyes, it was as if the world around us disappeared, leaving only the two of us in this slow, intimate dance. Her gaze held a softness, but there was something deeper behind it, something that I couldn't yet understand. By the end of the session, I felt a mix of emotions, calmer than I had been in days, yet filled with an unspoken longing. I packed up my mat slowly, reluctant to leave, knowing that the connection between us was far from over, even if neither of us had said a word about it. The days after that class felt like they had been stretched out, like time itself had slowed down. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the quiet intensity between us, the subtle brush of her hands against my shoulders, the way her eyes had lingered on mine with a kind of knowing. It wasn't like any connection I had ever felt before, and I couldn't tell if it was just the allure of a yoga teacher or something deeper, something I wasn't ready to face yet. But life didn't slow down, and neither did my mind. I continued to return to class, each time hoping that the next session would bring clarity. Yet, with every passing class, I found myself feeling more uncertain, more conflicted. I admired her from afar, always so calm, so centered. And I could tell she sensed it, there was something in the way she looked at me, a flicker of understanding. But nothing was ever said directly. She remained the calm, collected instructor, and I, the student caught between admiration and hesitation. During one class, I struggled to keep up with the flow of poses. My muscles were sore, my mind distracted, and I felt like I wasn't making the progress I wanted. I caught her watching me for a moment, and for the first time, it didn't feel like an unspoken connection. It felt like concern, like she noticed my struggle in a way that was more personal. After the session, she approached me, her presence steady and calm. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft but direct, as if she could sense my internal restlessness. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I'm fine," I said, though I knew I wasn't. I was feeling lost, both physically and emotionally. I was trying to move forward in life, to find peace, but something was holding me back. She smiled gently, not buying my lie, but she didn't press. Instead, she offered me something I hadn't expected, patience. "Don't rush," she said, her tone filled with quiet wisdom. "Good things take time. In yoga and in life, it's not about rushing to the end, it's about being present in each moment." I nodded, the weight of her words settling in my chest. It wasn't just about the yoga poses, it was about my whole life. I was so caught up in trying to achieve something that I hadn't stopped to appreciate where I was. Her advice, so simple yet so profound, resonated deep within me. There was a calmness in her, a patience that I didn't know I needed until she shared it with me. As she turned to leave, she glanced back at me, offering a smile that was both reassuring and knowing. "Remember," she added softly, "don't rush." I watched her walk away, her words echoing in my mind. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just following her teachings in yoga, I was learning something about myself. It wasn't going to be easy, but for once, I felt like I was on the right path. The journey was slow, but it was mine to take. The following week, something shifted. It wasn't just the physical progress I was beginning to feel in my body, it was something deeper, something stirring inside of me, something I couldn't ignore any longer. The quiet connection between us had grown in a way I couldn't quite put into words, yet every glance, every subtle moment, seemed to draw me in further. She had become more than just my yoga teacher, she had become someone I couldn't stop thinking about, someone whose presence had begun to feel essential to my days. That evening, after class, I stayed behind again. The studio had emptied out, the last of the students trickling out through the door, and I felt the familiar pull to linger, as though there was more to be said between us, even if we hadn't spoken about it. I watched her fold her mat with slow, deliberate movements, the calmness in her every action making me both at ease and unsettled. I hesitated for a moment, feeling that familiar nervous energy rise in me, but this time, I couldn't let it stop me. Taking a deep breath, I walked over to her, my heart racing slightly as I approached. She looked up as I stood beside her, and I could see that she wasn't surprised. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment too. Her expression was soft, open, but there was a quiet knowing behind her gaze. She seemed to understand that I wasn't just lingering to thank her again. This time, I had something real to share. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice a little more tentative than I had hoped. "About what you said. About not rushing." I paused, unsure if I was even making sense. I don't know why, but it stuck with me. I don't want to rush through life, through this, whatever it is between us. But at the same time, I feel like there's something here. Something more. She didn't interrupt me, and for that, I was grateful. I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air, and I wasn't sure if they were what she expected or not. But they were the truth, and that was all I knew to offer. The truth of how I felt when I was near her, the pull between us that seemed to grow stronger with each class, with each interaction. She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "I'm glad you came to talk," she said, her voice calm but gentle. "It's natural to feel pulled in different directions. But don't mistake those feelings for the rush. You're right. There's something here, but don't let it be something you chase. Let it come in its own time." Her words, though gentle, were firm. She wasn't rejecting me, she was inviting me into a space of understanding, of patience. What we have, or what could be, doesn't need to be rushed. The beauty is in the journey, not the destination. I felt a weight lift from my chest. For the first time, I wasn't alone in my thoughts. She understood the quiet conflict inside me, the pull of emotions that felt both right and overwhelming at the same time. Her words were like a balm to my restlessness, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. As she gathered her things, she looked up at me, her eyes soft. "It's about balance," she said simply. "And trust. Trust in the process. Trust in time." I nodded, feeling an unspoken bond form between us, stronger than anything I had felt before. She smiled again, more warmly this time, and as she walked past me to leave the studio, her presence lingered in the space between us. I stood there for a moment longer, letting her words settle within me. Whatever was happening, I knew she was right. I couldn't rush it. But something told me that, in time, this connection would unfold into something beautiful. The next few weeks in yoga class were a blur of mixed emotions. I went through the motions, breathing deeply, stretching, and trying to center myself, but all the while, my thoughts were consumed by her. It wasn't just the calm, assured way she moved, it was something deeper, something intangible that drew me to her. I would catch her glance across the room and feel a spark of recognition, as if we were both aware of something unspoken but couldn't yet fully grasp it. I tried to focus on the yoga, but she had a hold on me, one that wasn't just physical but emotional. During one class, as I struggled to hold a pose, I noticed her gaze shift toward me. She wasn't correcting my form or offering gentle guidance like she usually did. This time, her eyes lingered on me, studying me with an intensity that sent a quiet jolt of electricity through my chest. I shifted uncomfortably, not sure how to interpret the look, whether it was concern, curiosity, or something else entirely. But there was no denying it, there was something more than just a teacher-student relationship between us, something I hadn't allowed myself to confront until now. After class, as usual, the other students began to filter out of the room, leaving only the two of us. My heart pounded as I packed away my mat slowly, stalling, as though if I moved too quickly, the moment would slip away. She walked toward me, her steps measured, almost as though she was giving me space to speak, but not quite leaving. "You looked like you were struggling today," she said, her voice soft, almost like a whisper in the stillness of the room. "Is everything all right?" I felt a lump form in my throat as I met her gaze. The concern in her eyes was sincere, but it was more than that. There was a quiet understanding, a kind of empathy that went beyond just noticing my discomfort. She had seen through the facade I had been putting up for weeks, the one that convinced me I had everything under control. But in that moment, I realized I didn't. Not in the way I thought I did. I don't know," I replied, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "It's like I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore. I keep moving, but I don't know where I'm going. And I feel like I'm on the verge of something, but it's like I'm always stopping myself from taking that next step." She didn't respond immediately, but I could see her processing my words, letting them sink in. The room was so quiet, and the air between us was thick with unspoken emotions. Then, after a beat, she smiled gently, her eyes softening as if she had been waiting for me to voice the conflict I had been carrying. "It's okay to feel uncertain," she said quietly, her tone reassuring. "Sometimes, the hardest part is just acknowledging that you don't have all the answers. But that's when things begin to change. You have to trust that it's okay to take your time, to figure things out as you go." I felt a weight lift off my chest, her words resonating deeply, settling into the cracks of my own uncertainty. I had been so focused on finding an answer, on moving forward in the right way, that I hadn't stopped to listen, to myself, or to the world around me. I was in such a rush to reach some distant end that I hadn't realized that maybe, just maybe, the journey itself was the answer. Her smile deepened, and in that quiet moment, I felt a shift. It wasn't a huge revelation, but it was enough. The tension that had been coiling inside me began to unwind, slowly, as if something within me had finally started to make peace with the uncertainty. "I don't have all the answers either," she added, as if reading my mind, her voice more vulnerable than I had ever heard it. "But we figure it out, little by little, together." And in that moment, I realized that maybe we weren't so different after all. We were both learning to trust, to let go of the need for control, to allow the space to just be. Her words stayed with me long after I left the studio that evening, a quiet but profound reminder that sometimes, the most important thing is to trust in the process, not the destination. The days after our conversation were different. The quiet tension between us seemed to ease, but it wasn't gone, just softened, like a river that had slowed its current but still ran deep beneath the surface. Every time I walked into the studio for class, there was an unspoken understanding between us. We hadn't acknowledged it directly, but it was there, woven into every glance, every smile, every moment we shared. I was beginning to realize that the connection between us wasn't something to rush or force. It was something that would unfold in its own time, at its own pace. But it wasn't just about yoga anymore. It had become about presence, about showing up, not just physically, but emotionally. I was learning to be present, to embrace the quiet, to let go of the constant need to push forward. And it wasn't just her teachings in yoga that had led me here. It was her quiet strength, her grace, her ability to let things be. I realized that she had become something more to me than just a teacher. She had become a guide, not just in yoga, but in life. The next class came, and as usual, we went through the motions, breathing, stretching, moving through the poses. But today, I felt something different. The room felt warmer, the air softer. There was no pressure, no rush. Just the rhythm of breath, the movement of bodies, the silence between each pose. When I caught her gaze across the room, it wasn't filled with expectation or urgency, it was filled with something more subtle, more comforting. A knowing smile, a reassurance that we were exactly where we needed to be. At the end of the class, as we all sat in silence for our final meditation, I closed my eyes and let myself sink into the stillness. The world outside seemed to disappear, and for a brief moment, I was completely present. I wasn't thinking about what had come before, or what was to come after. I was just there, in the moment, in this space that felt both familiar and new. I felt at peace, but there was still something unspoken, between us. When the class ended, I packed up my mat and stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle on me. She was already by the door, talking to a few students, her smile still in place, the calmness of her presence radiating outward. As I approached her, our eyes met, and in that brief exchange, everything was clear. We didn't need to say anything more. She smiled at me, that same warm, knowing smile, and for the first time, I didn't feel any hesitation. "You're learning," she said quietly, her voice filled with a quiet pride that made my chest swell with warmth. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. "It's slow," I replied, my voice steady, "but I'm getting there." She stepped closer, her presence steady and grounding. She didn't say anything more, but her gaze spoke volumes. There was no rush, no urgency. Just a shared understanding that we were both moving through life in our own way, at our own pace. As I left the studio that evening, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet certainty that what was unfolding between us was real, and that it was worth waiting for. It wasn't the rush of instant gratification or the heady rush of a spark. It was something slower, deeper, something that felt like it was being built with each moment, each connection. The smile she had given me lingered in my mind as I walked out into the evening air. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, exactly where they were, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I did too.